gardeners, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I want to talk about domesticating animals and if it's possible to do that with reptiles, also the difference between taming and domestication, and basically how we can actually tame some of our reptiles down, and even if that's possible in the first place, because it's kind of a heated debate and a lot of different people have different opinions on it. So I'm just going to run through things and share my thoughts on all of this, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding on where I stand on this topic. So the very first thing that I want to cover is domestication. So it's very important to understand what the word domestication means. So the definition of domestication is the process of taming an animal and keeping it as a pet. So obviously that is done with reptiles. Another animal that's very commonly domesticated are dogs and cats. Obviously people keep them as pets, and people think that those animals are very tame and easy to handle, very easy to deal with. Those animals are able to build trust with their human owners because they're raised with humans as they grow up. An animal can be tamed if it is captured at a young age and raised with a lot of careful human nurturing. A single taming does not make the entire species domesticated though. So when it comes to domesticating a species of an animal, such as like a dog or a cat, no matter what, those animals can over time learn to trust humans, and that's why they are such amazing pets and people can have great relationships with them. But there are always going to be cases where there are going to be obviously aggressive dogs or cats. That's where it can become an issue with reptiles, because a lot of people think that all reptiles are just going to bite you. And they don't really keep in mind that cats and dogs actually bite too. So it's kind of just, there's a little bit of like a biased opinion, I feel like, when it comes to dogs and cats versus reptiles. So there are still stray cats and dogs, and obviously those ones are going to behave a little bit more untrusting towards humans. Those are going to be the more aggressive animals, and it's the same exact thing for reptiles as well. If you have a wild-caught reptile, it's not going to trust humans, and it's not going to be as handleable compared to a captive bred reptile that has been in the industry and has been raised by humans, and they're used to that human interaction, and they understand that those humans are the ones feeding them, and they have more of a trust and a relationship with the humans rather than a wild-caught animal that will just see the human as a predator. So is it possible to tame reptiles in the first place? The answer, I think, is yes. It is possible because humans have domesticated reptiles. There are so many different reptiles that are domesticated right now. A lot of the very popular ones are bearded dragons, ball pythons, corn snakes, crested geckos, leopard geckos, the list goes on and on. All of those animals have been domesticated, they are captive bred, and they are more trusting with humans. They have more of a relationship with them, they understand that that's where the food is coming from, and you can have a great tame relationship with that animal. That being said, it is also important to realize that these animals, especially reptiles, they are going to be relying on primal instincts. So if they do feel threatened in any way, they are likely to bite you because that is their main way to defend themselves other than running away. So that's just something that you're going to have to deal with when keeping reptiles. So a lot of people are way more scared, I think, about being bitten by a reptile compared to a dog or a cat. Dogs and cats bite all of the time. They scratch, like they do pretty much the same. They do worse damage actually than a lot of reptiles, depending on what you're keeping. So I feel like there's a little bit of a biased opinion because we're more used to dogs and cats and we understand those behaviors, whereas reptiles, it's a little bit new and not many people have much of an understanding of them and their behaviors, and they just feel as though these animals are just going to always be biting or scratching or hurting you and they're out to get you, when that's not really how it is at all. Only difference is that we're so much more accustomed to dogs and cats that we understand those behaviors and it's something that we're willing to deal with, whereas something with reptiles we're a little bit not as familiar with, and that just causes more of a fear within humans. So the best way to get a reptile, especially if you want one that is tame, is to get a reptile that is captive bred. You never want to get a wild-caught animal because not only will they have illnesses and you're definitely going to have to see a vet right off the bat, they're also not going to be as trusting and not as handleable, and you just aren't going to have as great of a relationship with that animal. You can in time if you really work with that animal, but a lot of the times it's just not going to happen, and it's better to get captive bred because these animals have been bred in this industry, they understand human contact, and they're way more used to it, and it's just going to be a better relationship for you with your reptile. So the last thing I want to cover in this video is it possible to tame a reptile that has bad behaviors, even if it's wild caught. Maybe it's just an angry bearded dragon that you happen to have, because again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Every single animal is going to behave differently. They all have their personalities. No matter how much research you do, there are general behaviors that these animals have, such as like a bearded dragon. For the most part, they're very calm, they're very chill, they're great with handling. However, there's always going to be some bearded dragons that don't like handling and that are more aggressive and fearful towards humans. And that's something that you really need to get in mind before you get a reptile, because no matter how much research you do, you have to know that your animal is going to behave in its own way. They all have their own personalities. So if you do that and you happen to get a reptile that is more fearful of you, and because of that it behaves in a more defensive manner, then there are ways to overcome that in time, so that way you can build a better bond with your reptile and have a better relationship in the end. So when it comes to taming your reptile, I have 3 tips that I think are going to lead to a successful relationship with you and your reptile. So those tips are to 1, have a routine, 2, hand feed your reptile, and 3, just show respect to your animal, because respect is so important when it comes to reptiles. So I'm going to go into these a little bit more in depth so that way you can have a better understanding. So number 1, when it comes to routine, that means that your animal probably isn't really familiar with you, doesn't know what's going on. It just sees you as a predator, and that's not something that's going to build a relationship over time. So when it comes to routine, it means to feed them at the same exact time every single day, turn the lights on and off at the same time every single day, approach them in the same way every single day. Don't ever throw them off and do a new behavior. You need to behave in the same way, so that way they can understand that you are not a threat. You're coming to feed them, you're coming to turn the lights on, you're coming to mist them, whatever the case may be, so that way they can get used to that routine and they will learn to trust that routine as well. So number 2 would be to hand feed your animal. So if you have a very defensive wild caught animal, I'm not saying that you literally need to stick your hand in the enclosure and try to hand feed them. You can also use tongs for your own safety, wear gloves, whatever it may be. But if the animal sees that the food source is coming from you, then they're going to trust you more. And when they see you, they're going to think of you as the food source, and they're going to be more excited to see you because of that. So a lot of people will just feed their reptile as if they're a dog or a cat, and they're just going to stick a food bowl in the enclosure. And that's not a good way to build a relationship with your animal, because they aren't going to understand that that food is coming from you. They're going to look at the bowl as more of the like positive reinforcement rather than you. So it's very important to make sure that your animal makes the connection between you and food, so that way they can build trust with you over time and see you as not a threat but as a food source, which is a positive thing. And number 3 is respect, and it kind of is common sense, but when you're dealing with any type of reptile, you should always be very respectful of them. So this means basically to just not go in and grab them and scare them and force them into handling when they don't want to do it. A lot of people think that this type of handling will be good for their animal and they'll just get used to it. I personally think that that's just negative reinforcement, and they're always going to be scared of you, and they're just going to be more likely to bite you. So just be respectful, ease into things when it comes to handling, especially if it's a new animal. Just leave it alone for a long time. Let it adjust to its new surroundings. Give it time, give it respect. Hand feed it, give it that routine, and over time, slowly but surely, try as much as you possibly can to try and handle that animal. And if it just doesn't want it, I wouldn't force it on the animal. That's why I have a wild-caught blue-tongued skink, and I don't force handling on him, because it's not worth stressing him out. And he's used to his routine. He sees me as a food source, and I have a great life with him. I've just accepted that he's not going to be an animal that I'm going to be able to handle very much, and I'm okay with that. But again, if that's not something that you want, then it's very important to make sure that you're getting a captive bred animal. So taming reptiles is possible, but there are always going to be cases. People think that when you tame reptiles, it means that they will never bite you. That is never going to be the case. An animal, no matter what type of animal it is, if it feels threatened, it's going to defend itself, because I mean, that's its like means of survival. It's literally how they survive in the wild, and it's how they're going to try to survive with you as well. There's nothing that's going to change that. Again, People think that reptiles biting you, I don't know what type of, maybe if you have a tegu or something, like, yeah, that could do some damage. But if you're keeping a little leopard gecko or something, or even a bearded dragon, they are never going to cause like a great amount of damage to you. Even snakes, like snake bites really aren't that bad because their teeth are so sharp that you hardly even feel it. They just make you bleed a lot. But yeah, I personally, dog bites and scratches, Chacho does way more damage to me than any of my reptiles have ever done to me. Like in a single day, he's done more damage to me than my reptiles have ever. No shade on Chacho though, because I love that little guy. But that's pretty much how it is. So these are my 2 cents on this entire subject. I hope that this was helpful. So please leave me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Can you say bye, dude?